Excellent. Thank you, Oz, and thank you everybody again for being here today, and to Zach for the introducing my talk here. I'm going to spend the next 8 minutes talking about slope. We all know what slope is. If you close your eyes, you can think about road signs that you've seen, maybe today, maybe this month, telling you about slope, warning big trucks about slope. You probably can also remember your middle school math class talking about slope. But I want to talk about slope in this meeting because while we all know what slope is, we know that slope is rise over run. We all know how to measure slope. We have to be careful about measuring slope. So these three images are slope measured at Kilbourne Hole in the north part of the crater where we were working with different baselines, so different runs, the same data, but just a different equation using a different pixel size. And so these are obviously very different color shades. Each color on each map means the same slope, and yet you can see that they're all very different maps. So what I want to do in this talk, and what I set out to do with our topographic group with RISE, was to understand what scale of slope is helpful for traverse planning. We know how to measure slope in 1,000 different ways, but what's a way that's actually going to help people figure out what slopes are safe for astronauts on the surface of the moon? And the second question is, does knowing what the slope is affect where people walk? So certainly it's going to affect where our traverse plans are. We're not going to tell an astronaut on the moon to go over a dangerous slope. But if the astronaut has information at their fingertips, if they know where they are and they know what the slopes are around them, does that change where they walk? And so to review some of the data that we have the boxes on my slides. There are these white dashed boxes that show the outline of our station boundaries, and then we have the colored squiggly abstract art lines, which are derived from Ben Feist's CODA program and the GoPros. So these are direct output from a GoPro camera of the location of our crew members while they were walking around, and just like before, the color coding is the crew pairs. So we can measure slope in the boxes, and we can measure slope by location for everybody along their traverse. So let me describe this chart here quickly. So the different colors, the blue, the orange, and the gray, are sites 1, 2, and 3. The slopes, or the median slopes, inside those white dashed boxes. The yellow bar is the median slope underneath where the crews were walking in the entire study for this graph, at 10 meter, 5 meter, 1 meter, 1.5 meter, and then successively smaller baselines or pixel sizes for slope. And hopefully you can see that the answer changes as we get to smaller pixel sizes, right? If we're looking at large pixels, these data were collected, the 10 meter data were collected by airborne LiDAR, 5 meter were collected by UAV, as well as the 1 meter, 1.5 and lower were collected by either a tripod mounted LiDAR or a backpack mounted LiDAR. So all kinds of different instruments, but we think that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is actually the scale is different, and so the answer of slope is different. You can note a few things. The 60 centimeter one is very interesting. There's a lot more variance in that slope measurement. I think that's because there are cliffs and gullies and boulders in our study area that are about that size, and so we're seeing that in the slope data. The 10 centimeter one is a little bit less, and that's maybe because you're getting multiple slope measurements around the same boulder. That's not really all that helpful. But another takeaway of this is that generally the crews experienced a representative slope in each of the sites. None of the bars that the crew walked, so the yellow bars, the mustard colored bars, are wildly different than the slopes that we measure from the remote sensing data or the tripod data, except for maybe the 10 centimeter, and that can be a different discussion perhaps. So which measure for slope is the most appropriate? Turns out this is a solved problem. Accessibility advocates have figured this out. If you've ever wondered how folks measure a sidewalk for slope, or how folks measure a path that you have heard is advertised as ADA compliant, they have a standard method for doing that, and they've published these trail guidelines. in a number of different accessibility guidelines over the past few decades. They also have a few definitions. There's cross slope, which is, which would be like if you're in a path, it's the left to right slope in your path. And they have running slope, which is the slope down the path. And the way they measure this is this tool right here. There's a digital level. It's about 60 centimeters long and has little feet. So the little feet stick up above little rocks that might be in the path. They could totally be tripping hazards, but they're not going to be contributing to the slope. This measurement is what the accessibility advocates are using for measuring slope and verifying that a place is actually accessible for folks that are mobility limited. And I advocate that we consider astronauts on the moon to be mobility limited folks, and we should use 60 centimeters as the scale to measure the slope to make sure that they can walk around. We could also think of a couple other things like using these metrics for how many other tripping hazards they are. So that might be rock abundance. All right, so back to our data. We have 60 centimeter slope. We have that happens to be a kind of slope that's important to Kilbourne Hole. There's a lot of information there in those bars, and it's also this mobility limited scale that's important for making sure that paths and sidewalks, et cetera, are accessible to people. So if we dig a little bit deeper into the data, now I've taken the color out, but the white boxes here are the median slope in a site. The gray boxes are median slope where people walked without any extra data. They had their map book and cuff checklist, but they didn't have any location information with the slope. And then the dark gray boxes are when the crew had information about the slope at their fingertips, as well as their location. Site one was obviously the steepest site. But people avoided the steepest parts of that site, whether they had data or not. People can avoid steep slopes without the data in their face. The flatter sites, however, site 2 and 3, and so when folks had the slope data at their fingertips, they were able to go in places that were slightly steeper than that, or they went to places that were slightly steeper than when they didn't have the data in hand. This is potentially a small signal, but another thing that makes me think this might be real is that the medians for all of these with slope runs is 12. It's just people found that same population of slopes basically when they had slope data at their fingertips. Okay, so some answers. I think we should use 60 centimeters. We can't do that on the moon right now. We should make an instrument that we can do that in the future, whether that's the LRO follow-on or some asset that goes to places that we want to send the folks, whether it's attached to the lander or attached to their suit. 60 centimeter slope is what we want. We also need other things, though. We need to know rock abundance, other things that might be slope hazards to figure out a fuller picture of what traverse difficulty might be vis-a-vis slope. Does knowing what the slope is affect where people walk, where the crew walks? Yeah, maybe sometimes. I think it depends on how complicated the site is. I think that people are not going to walk in extremely steep places, whether they have something on their some idea of slope at their fingertips or not. But it could help. It could help plan deltas to the traverse with confidence that you're not going to get yourself into bigger trouble. Thank you for that, and happy to have questions at the end in the discussion.
Thanks, Patrick. And according to my watch, we actually probably have almost 2 minutes for questions. And given I cannot see who is in the room, you'll have to take those.
It's not. I think you flick it on there.
Hi, Ben Feist, Johnson Space Center. Just one comment. The 60 centimeter per pixel limit, sorry, the 60 centimeter slope resolution you were suggesting might be possible for some of the Artemis landing sites, because there's research happening right now to create shape from shading models using the 60 centimeter per pixel resolution of some of those landing sites. So all is not lost on Artemis planning for that being the answer. It's a good answer to get. I'm glad it wasn't smaller.
That's great. Yeah, I hope that 60 centimeters pushes some development, and maybe it's shape from shading. Maybe that'll get us there get us there sooner. That's encouraging. Brent.
Brent Gary, NASA Goddard, cool stuff. So you were talking about how the crew would avoid kind of some of the steeper parts during your analog tests. Like now put yourself in the crew with the helmets and the suits, and then some of those traverses and some of those Artemis regions could be a long duration on a 10-degree slope, 15-degree slope. So what are some of the limits that you think are good for pushing, how long a duration they're going to stay on a certain slope angle?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Like there's a cumulative stress to being on a steep slope, right? And so I don't know what those guardrails would be, but this gives us a way to kind of quantify that. I think it gives us a way to kind of add up what those slopes might be. And I didn't mention this as my slides, but I want to also say that I'm not advocating that 12 degrees is a safe or a risky slope. It's what we had with, actual humans on the ground in New Mexico. The numbers that'll be safe with moon boots on the South Pole will be, probably different.